Welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, or as I like to put it, City of Demons, Hollyweird, La La Land, all the funny stuff associated with Southern California, specifically in the LA region. And we are broadcasting from our home base, 107.7 FM, New Orleans, Louisiana. That is UPRN. We also will have to give the love to Deprogrammed Radio Network in the UK with their terrestrial stations London, Leeds, elsewhere in the EU, iHeartRadio, and today, because of our guest, we also get Twitch. Let me also give a shout out to those of you who are listening via YouTube or any of the other forms. Now, we always bring you quality shows, quality guests, but today is a super special guest because she is really down to earth, really cool, and most of you folks, if not all, who pay attention to paranormal, then you know exactly who I'm about to speak to. She is the original Ghost Girl Diary. She stars Ghost Girl Diaries. First it became YouTube. It started YouTube streaming until it became a television series. So, now that I've given some of the background, with that being said, and I've already sort of told you who it is, let me introduce you the one, the only Miss Krystal Leandra. Krystal, welcome to the
Yes.
show.
Hi, Dr. J. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine, and definitely of all the people tuning in. Now, let me ask you this. Long before you started Ghost Girl Diaries, and even before we get to Zach Baggins' Paranormal Challenge, why and how did you get started with paranormal?
Paranormal has been something that has always been a part of my life, literally since I was a child. I don't want to say I was like totally gifted, but my aunt's house was really haunted. It's been like a generational home for probably like 50 or 60 years. And every time, an elder would pass on, they would hand it down to the next generation. And I don't know, we just kind of grew up, my cousins and I, with accepting that the house was haunted always, and we were never afraid. And at about 3 years old, the first kind of trigger sign my mother had was I started telling her, and this was before I could really put together full sentences and full paragraphs with speech because I was so young. I would tell her how I drowned in my past life and that I was married and I left my children behind and how upset I was by it. So that's really the core of where it started.
I've said this a couple times more recently that I've rewatched this episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and what it shows is several, and I mean several, children profiled around the world through up until the age of 7. They are able to recount details of their previous lives. They'll say, before I used to be big, now I'm a little boy, or things like that. Or they'll interact with, say, if they are the spirit of their great grandmother, then they will go in the restaurant with their parents, and then they'll start interacting with the waitress as if the little child is the spirit in it is the great grandmother speaking to the waitress, and the waitress is astonished. Do you think this is a case that happened to you where you have some sort of family lineage where that's why you were remembering the spirit that unfortunately drowned?
I'm not really sure what would start to trigger it in the very beginning was but like my mother and I grew up in Colorado, so there's lots of like water, there's lots of lakes, there's mountains, it's gorgeous there. But if we would be driving and we would be driving like over a bridge, over a river, or over a lake, I would have a meltdown in my car seat, and she couldn't figure out why. And it was until I was able to gather, like, to verbalize, Mom, this is what happened. My mom originally thought that I was like making stories up. She was concerned. My aunt was really into paranormal stuff. She loved watching things like Tales from the Crypt and Elvira. And at a very young age, my aunt would let me watch those kind of paranormal TV shows with her. And so for a long time, my mom thought I was triggered by watching paranormal shows with my aunt. But even to this day, I still have a horrible fear of water. And I've even like taken swimming lessons. I can swim. Still to this day, I've never been on a boat or a yacht or a ship out of fear of water. And so eventually I would start to really pull the story out of details. And my mom said, for a 3-year-old, it was awfully gory details of a death, of drowning, and she didn't understand where I would have gotten that from. So finally, after I was really able to pull a lot of information together, she was like, my kid's weird, and she definitely has a connection to the other side.
Now, you said your aunt she loved these paranormal television shows like Tales from the Crypt and Elvira. Did your mother enjoy the same sort of entertainment, or as other people call it, as reality TV as it really is to us?
Not as much as my aunt was. My aunt was really into it at the time. I was a mid 80s baby, so the show that was really big up until the 90s was Tales from the Dark Side. I'm not sure if you guys are
Of
familiar with
course.
that.
Oh, yes.
So my aunt would watch Tales from the Dark Side, and I had it memorized. I had the full intro. These are the Tales from the Dark Side. As a 3-year-old, I had that memorized. And my mom said she would just freak out. She'd like, what is going on with my child? Like, why are you into this? They tried to get me to kind of forcefully be removed from watching those programs just to make sure. And I ended up throwing like a fit because I just love TV, anything related to paranormal and hauntings. And finally, they gave in. They were like, we can't stop her. She just loves this stuff. And it never gave me nightmares as a child. I was just very, very in tune spiritually. It was never something I was afraid of as far as interacting with, a ghost per se or a spirit.
When do you have your first memories of actually interacting with what we would now call ghosts?
Well, like I said, my aunt's house was haunted, so you'd hear like the bangings and the knocks, or you'd ask it to, if someone's down here with us, can you knock just to let us know so we're not afraid? So that would happen. But the predominant one, so I was always a believer, in other words. But when my grandmother passed away, I think I was between the ages of 14 and 15 when she died. I was very close with my grandmother. She was full-blooded Native American Cherokee, registered with the Cherokees, and she lived on the reservation. She was very spiritual. I learned a lot from my grandmother, and when she passed away, it was kind of unexpected and really traumatizing for me because she was just like the elder that I always had looked up to, and I was very close with her. And when she passed away, the night she had died, I was just distraught. And I was in my bedroom alone because obviously I'm like a freshman in high school, just crying. I had the lights off, my door shut, just, in despair. And I hear my grandmother's voice come in my bedroom and say, Krystal. Well, I heard it once, the first time, and I kind of thought to myself, I'm like hearing things. So I was continuing to cry, and I just kept hearing, I 3 more times, Krystal, Krystal, and it kept getting louder. And finally I hear, Krystal, I love you. And I sat straight up in bed, and I was like, oh my God, this is real. Like I knew it was already real, but that was like that was the moment I was like, this is the path that I have to take, because other people, that don't get to experience those interactions, I feel like it's not always about demons and darkness, but it's about having that really kind of neat, beautiful, rare gift to be able to communicate with the other side. So that was sort of my vision, and kind of what I was preaching to people ever since was, if you get to communicate with the other side, it's a gift, not a curse.
It absolutely is a gift, and there's so many unknowns that we can learn from the other side. Now, let me ask you a quick question about when you heard your name being called 3 times. Did you hear Krystal being heard from your ears, or inside your inner ears, meaning like, say, as a telepath would hear?
Not telepathically, which is why I was trying to scuff it off as, I don't know. I guess, even to this day, sometimes you have interactions. I feel like it's the human thing to do, to say, oh, it was something else. And that's why I was having such a hard time believing it when it happened, which is why I had to sit there and hear it over and over, because I was like, this is legitimately, I can hear it. It is like loud. And even at the end, when she shouted, I love you, I was like, oh my gosh, like it is real. I heard it. In fact, I slammed my door open. I turned my lights on. I knew it was my grandmother. It was her tone. You just know when it's people that are around you. And it was really a special moment. It was one of the most predominant moments I've had as far as hearing what's called a DVP, which is a direct voice phenomena.
And now, I'm assuming that was a big changing point when you realized that you were being communicated with from someone from the other side. What did you start doing in your daily life? Did you start, say, using divination items such as a Ouija board to communicate with the other side?
Not necessarily at that point. In high school, my mom didn't support purchasing gear, like being an official ghost hunter or anything. And it never really crossed my mind to purchase anything myself. I will say it changed my thought process as far as, sinking into a depression, which I feel like is normal anytime someone loses a family member. That kind of just went away, just in a sense of knowing that my time communicating with her wasn't inevitably, finished. It wasn't done. And so I guess the depression went away, realizing like I will see grandma again. I will communicate with her again. It's not over. This isn't the end. This isn't the last chapter. I did though start at that age. So I was about 15 when I'd finally kind of made the decision to start investigating local areas. But we would do things that kids do that you shouldn't do, like going into a graveyard at midnight and seeing if you experience things. And there's a lot of underground areas in Denver that are closed off to the public. There used to be an actual underground city in downtown Denver that they've closed off. And so a lot of those places, as a local, we grew up with, like, my friends, whoever had the license at the time, obviously 15 or 16, was the one that drove us to these abandoned, like, asylums. There's abandoned asylums that are underground and half underground. And we would go to those locations and have experiences.
Because you mentioned Colorado, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Stanley Hotel. Have you been there?
Hundreds of times, quite literally, hundreds of times.
And did something happen to you almost every time? And can you give some examples of what you experienced when you were there?
It did, yeah. I went there a few times, like in my early 20s when I first started out paranormal journeys, and things did happen. I eventually had made friends with a resident paranormal investigator that worked at the Stanley Hotel, and she actually had like the key to all the locations that were the most haunted spots at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. And so there were a lot of predominant things that happened. There's so many different things at the Stanley Hotel that I've experienced. Like, for example, there's a presidential suite. So that's where like Zach Bagans or Dave Schrader would stay if they were doing some sort of a paranormal event. And the things that are in there are things like Native American spirits. And there's actually like a leprechaun spirit and elemental spirits that are in there. And then on the other side is something called the concert hall, which is very, very haunted. And it sits between the actual like hotel itself and the carriage house, which is one of the spots that only Ghost Adventures got to go in. So they think it's some sort of like a transporting maybe portal in the concert hall where energies come in and out of from it. The most recent thing that I had experienced there was they believe some sort of cowboy has remanifested himself from like, the early 1900s. And the way you're communicating with him is he is predominantly stinky with like BO.
Because you
Mm-hmm.
know what? If you think about the time and era when if you were a cowboy being some of the first pioneers to the West, how often would you get a bath? There wasn't
Absolutely.
showers at the time on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, there's some amazing stuff. I've actually seen. I'm not a huge believer in elementals and like weird things like that. And I feel like anything, it's hard to believe till you've seen it. But I have seen what we believe to be a sort of like a troll figure manifest inside of the Stanley Hotel in the concert hall, which was quite terrifying, to be honest. So there's so many things at the Stanley Hotel. I shared a bed with one of my girlfriends. There was a paranormal convention there that I was a part of. And one of my girlfriends and I shared a bed. We were facing the opposite side of each other, and we felt a full figure crawl in between us to
Ooh.
the point where it moved the sheets, where it like laid down in the sheets. And we both felt that, and we both confirmed it with each other. So yeah, if you're wanting a place to go, I always say the Stanley Hotel, Estes Park, Colorado, is one of the friendlier haunts, if that makes sense.
Now, There's two questions that I always ask people who are ghost hunters. I've asked the same question to Grant Wilson, to Dustin Perry, to Jeff Bellinger, and Katrina Weidman, just to name a few, and I'm going to ask you now. The
Okay.
first, have you ever come across a ghost of an extraterrestrial?
Yes,
You
we do.
have.
We have the Bross Hotel, which is in, let's see, the Bross Hotel's in Paonia, Colorado. I have a micro sort of pilot that I shot there on our YouTube channel. So it's youtube.com/Ghost Girl Diaries, all one word. We had gotten a few really strange, I guess I can only explain them as rods. And I had consulted I have a friend named Chuck Zukowski. If you don't know who he is, he lives in Colorado. He used to be a sheriff who is now straight up 100% a UFO hunter. He conducts investigations for cattle mutilations all over the state of Colorado. Actually, I believe it's the entire Southwest region. But I had messaged Chuck and I said, I have this really strange footage and I'd like for you to look at it. And we ended up compiling some sort of evidence thing where he was teaching me about Roswell rods. Have you guys ever heard of those?
Yes. Oh,
Yep.
yes.
And so we had several Roswell rods. I had never captured, I still to this day, it's the only time I've captured those on film. But they're not normal anomalies like what we're used to seeing as like, the balls or orbs of energy, right? When you're in a location, these were actual predominant rods that were sort of in a spiral image, going through the screen. And we had caught so many of those, I knew I needed to consult someone else. And Chuck was like, you found several of those. And so basically the Roswell rod, just if anyone's listening that doesn't know anything about it, first Google it. But second, it's a lot of locations like Area 51 or Roswell, New Mexico. They have caught similar images to the Roswell rods. So they think it could be some sort of residual energy, possibly from, alien contact. And by the way, where we received those on film, Paonia, Colorado, very, very tiny hole in the wall town. And we weren't expecting it, that's for sure.
You know what? I have to say congratulations because of all the people I've asked this, and I just gave you a short list of people I've asked these two questions. You are the second person to ever say they've actually caught a ghost or in the process of ghost hunting have seen the ghost of an extraterrestrial. So thank you for giving me that answer. Here comes the next question of the two that I always want to find out. Have you ever come across a ghost that was speaking in a dead language like Sumerian or ancient Greek or something like that?
We have received, actually, at that same location, we received what we thought was Latin, and which I think is also a dead language, which also made us very nervous because Latin oftentimes is associated with demonic activity. We had received, during that EVP session, we had received what appeared to look like let's call it a shadow figure with like a pointy tail and pointy ears. So it would be like a human figure with, basically kind of an image of like the devil, I guess you could say. We did have it translated and we weren't able to release that publicly because of what it said. But yes, I believe we've captured EVPs in Latin.
Probably, if you can't release it, it probably sounds to me it might have been an angry spirit that you were in contact with him.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not good luck to, release demon names and things they say that aren't appropriate because you don't want people at home repeating that and possibly manifesting it in their own sense, if that makes sense.
I'm so glad you touched upon that. I don't know who it was that I was talking to that said the longer a word has been used in our time, say a couple thousand years, and the more energy that it invokes, the more power that the word itself gains. Therefore, someone from another time who repeats that same word or phrase of words will bring all the energy of all those years, of all those times of the name or names being used. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I've always thought that would be the case, but clearly there are words of power.
Absolutely, especially demonic, names. One of the girls that is one of my side techs is Chanel. She's one of our camera techs, and she's really into studying kind of occult dark stuff, and she absolutely believes if you say a demonic name, you're just be prepared for the consequences type of thing. You know what I'm saying? But definitely old. You're looking at old scripture, so absolutely I agree.
Now, let's go to when you found out about Zach Baggins' Paranormal Challenge. What prompted you to go and to try out for this challenge?
So let's see. I had a friend that I'd been investigating with for a while, like since high school. We were not super serious. We owned like one camcorder and like a ton of digital record. It wasn't like the pro side of it, if that makes sense. And they had put out a casting call, and we applied for it, and we never heard anything back. And then about a month later, they put out another casting call. I'd actually seen it through, I believe, Dave Schrader's social media. And on a whim, it was literally like 4 in the morning because I was on like Central Mountain Time, and I think Dave was on later time zone. And I decided at 4 in the morning, I kind of sat there for like 20 minutes debating if I should apply again because we didn't hear anything the first time. Should I even put the energy out? So I said, you know what, screw it, get up. We're going to apply for it, see what happens. And literally the next day, within hours, we heard from the producers that we had been chosen to do an interview.
And that's what spawned, I'm assuming, because of that is what spawned Ghost Girl Diaries, or was it reverse order? Meaning, at what point did Ghost Girls Diaries become a series on TV?
Right. Well, we're not officially on TV yet. We're still in distribution, but and I can't talk much about that. Darn it! I know everybody's wanting to know about
NDEs,
that.
don't even worry.
Yeah.
Non-disclosure agreements, NDAs,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, we were on Paranormal Challenge, which this is a different crew I was with at the time. We were season finale winners. And then I started traveling, doing like conventions. My name started getting out there. I had no idea what I was going to do next. I ended up getting picked up by several different production companies, pro production companies out there that have probably done, paranormal series that everyone has seen. I signed several contracts with different production companies to make a series. I was never satisfied with what they were willing to offer, meaning I believe in raw, authentic, non-scripted, exciting paranormal, basically. And sometimes it was fake and scripted, and I didn't want my name to be slashed and be a part of that. So I basically waited it out. I had a dream one night. I kind of asked the universe, "What do I do next?" I'm lost. And I had this dream of this book opening, and it said Ghost Girl Diaries on it. And literally within about 30 days, I made the decision to do a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel started out as me basically breaking paranormal production down on a film level. So talking about pre-production, production, post-production, how they make these. Often it would be like being kind of a critic on it, like how do I feel about it? Do I think it's legitimate? Do I think it's scripted? And literally in the beginning, when I started the channel, I had no idea anyone was going to even want to listen to it. And then, fast forward a year later, that this started back in 2014-15, we had hundreds of thousands of followers, we had millions of views on the channel, and it just kept growing and growing. From there, about December 2017, Logan Paul had released his famous video of going into Suicide Forest with a dead body. And anyone on paranormal with YouTube related, discussions with Suicide Forest, which I had several, was hit really hard, and they stuck in algorithms basically making it so that anyone on YouTube that had discussions regarding Suicide Forest would be sort of shadow banned. So our YouTube channel plummeted in January of 2018. And that was when I made the executive decision that, hey, we're going to hire a crew, which we have a full production crew now, and we are in the process of shooting Ghost Girl Diaries, the series.
Smart. You know what? I know a lot of people who are big players in YouTube, and so much is being demonetized and censored. And the whole motto when YouTube was founded was to have a forum that is not censored, where anybody can be their own producer, their own star, tell their own story, and in come all the big bucks. And I think it even started, Krystal, before 2018. At least we started seeing the effects of this at the end of 2017.
Oh yeah, it hurt us bad. We went from like thousands of views in a day, even in a week, to like hundreds. It was crazy. And so we did make a Twitch channel. I'm still active on our Twitch channel, but I decided, you know what, this wasn't really what my big picture was anyway. You know what I mean? Like I had a bigger vision anyway. And I had a lot of fans upset with me for walking away from YouTube. It wasn't their fault. We were getting like views rolled back. We were losing subscribers. Like whatever algorithm was happening, it was removing subscribers. I mean, by the thousands. Like they were removing millions of views from our channel. And I just got fed up. You put a lot of money, effort, and energy into something. And I was like, I need to put that energy into something that's going to be successful in the end.
Well said. And you know what? The fact that you're doing this now as opposed to realizing this 20, 30 years later, which you would have just that much more experience by then, but maybe the drive by hitting all these walls or obstacles like what you just mentioned about YouTube would have might pre- prevented you from taking the leap, which you now have finally done so. Now, I know we can't discuss the details, so I am assuming we could not even mention the network involved, right?
We cannot, yep, we can't do that yet. We're still in the process of distribution. I can mention that my crew is amazing. I have some amazing people that are behind me. I have a producer named Kat. She helps me a lot with the pre-production side of things. She's a singer as well. She just released her new EP album, Holler Cat and Elm's Landing. They also produced our intro song through Elm's Landing, which is amazing. And then the other person that's really behind me, obviously my co-owner, Blake, he's been doing this since, YouTube days with me, 2014. And then Chanel, she does a lot of our like camera work and stuff like that. So you have to surround yourself with really strong, positive, like-minded people that are as goal oriented as you, because what we're doing here is not a small goal. You know what I mean? Like producing your own series is not for small potatoes.
No, definitely not. And I've been involved in the discussions with others and helping others, and it's not just a not just a huge challenge. It's a lot of time, work, and even a lot more waiting than anything else that I've seen to have come across with other friends who are in the stage where you are, where they're under NDAs, their series haven't quite launched, but they've already filmed, and I'm sure you know the rest of there. Now, back to your own investigations. Have you ever caught any or ever had any phone calls of any dead friends or relatives?
No, I have not ever had phone. I've heard of people having that before, but I have not. I have heard of that before, which I find it to be very interesting and compelling. I've had phone calls come through that have been like strange white noise or or no number that have been kind of strange.
After an incident, after some ghost hunting adventure?
Honestly, most of our weird stuff like happens during pre-production, oddly, and Kat and I often have really strange things happen during the pre-production process or like while we're on set. I mean, here's a good one. Between this and aliens, we were just talking about aliens. I'm looking at the girls because they're working with me in here right now. They're helping me mod and stuff. We went to a location. I'm not going to say where or what because I can't. But I will say that when we showed up to the location, this was very recent, like January recent. We showed up to meet with the owner because clearly we were going to do like an interview with the owner regarding the location. And the owner, we thought may have been an actual alien herself.
Ah, that really piques my interest. Not too long ago, I was doing a show about Men in Black, and the question is are they humans trying to protect something, or are they in fact ETs that are either looking like humans or even going so far as to wearing humans sort of like clothes?
Human skin, no, not human outfit. No,
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not an alien hunter. That's 100% sure. Like, I'm not, I believe, I live in Vegas. You're going to, if you live in Las Vegas, you're not far from Area 51. You have the Air Force Base. You're going to see strange lights, often. In fact, Kat and Chanel have been here for a week working with me on production stuff, and they've even seen some strange lights in the sky. But, I had a friend named Sean who was in the Air Force. I've actually talked about this on my channel before. And Sean knew I was into like the ghost side and he did the UFO side. He was in the Air Force. He was a pilot. He could take the jets like really high out of the, I'm not familiar with the lingo, so I hope I'm not butchering it for anyone that's familiar with Air Force. But he would take it almost out of the atmosphere. He would take GoPros with him. He would get footage of like face-to-face footage of like UFOs.
Wow.
And he was posting them on his YouTube channel. This was it was right before I started YouTube, so probably 2013, 2014 when it happened. And he had been posting these videos and calling me. He had sent me a hard drive with backups on them because he just trusted me with them. And then one day out of the blue, he's been doing this for a while. His boss had told him, you really need to be careful what you post because, it's just not safe. And then one day out of the blue, he calls me in a panic. He's like, they're after me. They're here. They're outside. And I'm like, who? And he's like, I can see this like black car. I'm assuming he was, referring to men in black sitting across the street watching his house. And so this continued sporadically for a few months. And then all of a sudden one day he calls me a few months later and he goes, if something happens and I disappear, like just make sure you keep the hard drive that I gave you. And I didn't know what was going on. He's like, I just know that they're gonna take me and they're gonna get me. And I'm like, are you, the Men in Black? And I didn't know if he was being paranoid. He lived in Texas at the time, so I couldn't like see him. I was in Colorado. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. All of a sudden, like a week goes by. I hadn't heard from him, which was odd. But I call his phone. His phone's been shut off. I go onto his social media. His YouTube channel's been deleted. I get a hold of like his parents. His parents are like, oh, he was involved in a military accident and he died. And I was like, you're just okay with that answer? You know what I mean? Like, how are you just okay with that answer? So I was, telling some of my friends about it. I was like, I have this hard drive. I don't know what to do with it. I feel like I put it in like a safety deposit. Had all of his like authentic UFO footage on it. I go home that night and the damn hard drive exploded in front of me and it like set a fire and it wasn't even plugged into anything, might I add. It was this. So after that I was like, I believe and I don't want to mess with aliens ever again. And I haven't, by the way.
You know what, Krystal? You actually started speaking about what I was going to ask you. What I was going to say was after he started taking everything down off YouTube and not being out there so much, did the hard drive that was in your possession suddenly become erased? But no, it went one step further and it blew up.
It literally set fire. It literally set on fire. And luckily it had been in the bathroom when it happened. So TMI, I actually threw it in the toilet because I didn't know how fast to put the fire out, if that makes sense. I didn't want my house to blow up. But yeah, the actual hard drive set aflame and it was not salvageable. And he to this day, it's presumed like his parents live in Montana and they just assume he's dead. And they had like a military funeral for him. Personally, I don't think he's dead. He was extremely intelligent. He was in the Air Force. He flew, these fancy jets. He was so smart. I think they probably took him somewhere and they're using him, for intelligence on that side. He didn't willingly take down the UFO footage, though. It was erased after he, quote, had a military accident. Yeah, and after that, it really did scare me so bad. Because, he used to try to educate me on things. And once again, I've never really been into UFOs that much. I just listened to his stories. But he would try to educate me on good aliens versus bad aliens versus like what's danger, ships. Apparently there's a difference in ships. Also remember he had a bird's eye view, or not everybody up front view like he did because he had access to, these Air Force jets. But I have over the years, that was about 6-7 years ago when this happened. Over the years, I will get sporadic emails through like my business email. and they're emails from like an external source, and you can't respond to them, but it'll be like a sentence, and it'll say like, don't worry, your friend Sean is okay and he misses you. And like I'll get these weird like cryptic messages sporadically. In fact, after I had posted the video on YouTube about him, I had received another one that was about a year ago. So I think he's still out there. I don't think that they actually like killed him like they do, but I think it is almost this thing where they put him in like a changing identity sort of scheme where they just put him in a different place.
Like WITSEC, witness protection, in other
Yeah,
words.
basically. Well, I think also him being so intelligent, I don't think they could waste his brain because of how smart he was.
That too. Now, I've noticed this happen a lot when it comes to UFOs. And when I spoke to Richard Doty, who was in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, he said that he was allowed to talk about ETs, but anything that had to do with technology or even medicine, anything that say could extend humanity or human lives for about another 20 years was classified. That's the stuff they didn't want us to know. And I thought that was very, ironic how they're at one side they say, hey, we're alone on this giant ball or this small ball or surrounded by trillions of other balls that are orbiting around other bigger balls around this emptiness that we call space. And at the same time, yet there is such a threat to it that they want it to be they want it to shut it down, and then the other time they turn a blind eye and let people talk, almost as if they want the ridicule factor to come in. But I haven't noticed that with ghosts and paranormal. There is no authoritative figure that comes out and says, Krystal, you can't do this, or this ghost that you filmed or caught on EVP saying something is to be censored. You've never had anything like that, have you?
No, and you always hear about the UFO hunters like going missing, which I feel is so tragic, and then they find them dead like a month later. There was one in the UK I did a story about not too long ago. It's so tragic that that happens. I will say though, oftentimes you will get things that people that come after us, in particular, the ghost hunting side of like extreme religious people that think we're kind of dealing with the devil. We're Satanists. What's another one that we get? I mean, it's always this really dark, extreme stuff. And we're like, no, we're not Satanists. No, the devil's not our friend. No, we just communicate with the dead. That's all.
Now, I've talked to other people who are psychic enough to where they see dead people, and I've asked the gruesome question if they see them in the state that they died in or if they see them in, say, a happy point of their life, and I've heard both. Do you have any sort of that ability?
No, I don't. Well, I'll see like figures of like like shadow people, if that makes sense. I think that we as humans have the ability to put filters on. I always call it like on my channel like a hat. You're putting your filter on like a top hat type of thing. And the reason I say that is I think certain people can handle certain things better than others. And that could go all the way extreme to the people that are completely shut down, that don't want to see or experiencing anything, all the way up to people that are very psychic and can see someone in their form of when they passed away. I also think that that can be more of a thing where you communicate with like your spirit guides and angels and ask them to sort of help you open up in order to see those things. I have seen a little girl that drowned one time, and it scared me so bad because she was like very discolored and blue and pale, and her hair was really long, dark, and wet, almost like the Ring sort of figure. I think she just needed help, but just seeing her scared me so bad. I remember literally at the time shouting out to my guides, I cannot handle seeing anything. Like, please don't let me see anything else. And I just think it's up to the person on how much they can handle and sort of take in when it comes to communication.
And the irony is you can have some macho people that fear nothing and say, "Yeah, nothing will scare me." Yet when something like that happens, they'll be the first to turn and run.
Right.
That's when the true test of character comes, is when you're in that moment, not when you can speculate about it, but when you're actually face it. Now, you did mention that some people accuse you of dealing with the devil or Satanists and other all this baloney. But let me ask you about the true negative effects that has come about from being involved in the paranormal, specifically with ghosts, which is that some people do have demonic activity attached to them, whether it be anything as low as oppression to obsession to the most extreme being demonic possession. What have you seen in your line of work?
Oh man, I've seen a lot. I had one crew member that came on set with me. He was I love veterans. My co-owner is an Army veteran. My head of security is an Air Force veteran. So I love veterans. So I met this gentleman who was a Army veteran as well, and he was also fluent in camera work. This is before YouTube happened. So I invited this guy to be my camera tech. Once again, like you just said, I'm very tough. I've been to war. I can handle it. And I was still trying to prep him for it. And what ended up happening was um, we were in Jerome, Arizona, which is a very old haunted mining town. There's a building that I have access to from the episode I was on with the Travel Channel. I still am friends with the family. So the family gave me access to this building that's known for having demonic activity. And that's because over the years, people have broken into this building and done rituals and summoning and things like that. So I just wanted to prepare the crew for kind of anything that, make sure you're prepared for it. And unfortunately, he was a little too tough to take any of my advice. And we ended up going to Jerome, Arizona. We filmed in this building. And while we were ending one of the interviews, he had told me he felt really lightheaded and sick. And so my first suggestion was, why don't you step out of the building, get away from the energy, and maybe breathe some fresh air. He stepped out of the building and he just started vomiting blood everywhere.
Ooh,
And
ouch.
he wasn't sick previous to this, might I add, and he was really, really ill. So we decided to go back to the room. I was like, well, if we have to, be delayed a few days filming, we'll do what we need to do. So we went into the Grand Jerome Hotel, which is where we were staying. They had accommodated us with several rooms, but all of the crew decided to follow this gentleman back in to watch him and just make sure he was okay. Well, he had also been tough and decided the room he wanted to stay in was one of the most haunted rooms. It was previously one of the emergency rooms and surgery centers before it was a hotel. So he went in this room and we were following him, just kind of keeping quiet. He hadn't thrown up again. We don't really know where the blood had come from. And all of a sudden he looks over at the bathroom, which was not far, probably 6 feet, and the door was cracked open. And he had said that he saw demons in the bathroom. And once again, going back to this guy being an extremely tough dude from the military, nothing shook him. He was very poised at all times from being at war. And he had a complete meltdown. He was laying on the bed. We think a possession took place. He started to spin on his back. He couldn't sit still. He was screaming, crying. Blood started to drip out of the side of his eyes. I was still fairly new at this point. I didn't realize that I wasn't even prepared, to be perfectly honest. That was another lesson I had in my journey. I was equipped with like holy water and sage, and we had a few other things. So I had my crew, we had to have the crew hold him down, and I literally had to wipe holy water on him. He had to drink a little bit of it, and finally he calmed down, and we had to get him a separate room at a separate hotel because he'd had just a total meltdown. So that was a bad thing I witnessed.
Two things I
Um,
want to say about that. One, the room that happened to be an emergency surgery room, is that what you said, right?
yeah, that was it.
I would imagine the energy of that room is so much because so many people die in the midst of a surgery, or they come in for one emergency that cannot be fixed by the doctors, especially in any given era. And so I would think that so many people pass through the other side, and that would make it a very I don't want to use the word haunted, but a very powerful place on the other side. Did you get that feeling when you walked in that room?
Oh, I mean, I've stayed in that room several times. There were literally thousands of patients that died in there, not only minors, but minors' wives that would go into labor at the time. You know, we're talking 1800s sometimes. That they didn't make it out of labor, and so they would die, or the babies would die. So you're talking thousands of people potentially died. There's so much energy in that room, which I did warn them before they made the decision to choose that room. There's so much energy. There's a connecting hallway to a couple of rooms in that same area. And literally all night, the rooms just open and close as if doctors are walking through, going to the other room. So I had warned them, if this is the room you're choosing to stay in, it's okay. But understand that it is still an active residual, hospital room that is still, surgery procedures are still happening in there. You know what I mean? And they still
Yes.
chose that room. Now, the fact that he quote, saw demonic things in that room, I assume followed us from the other building over, probably were attached to him. Long story short about that guy, he ended up having trouble in his personal home. He ended up quitting. Actually, he couldn't handle it. He got followed home and was having like demonic activity in his house for months, and that's why he quit.
So it did follow him, and that's another huge thing. I would think that a lot of people that encounter a spirit and end up having an attachment with them. How many times have you come across that? Because I hear it a lot.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, so Chanel and I grew up similar, and between her and I, we're always getting attachments when we go to places. So, but you just have to learn how to get rid of them quickly. You know what I mean? Like you have to have spiritual sense, I guess. Kat is from the East Coast. Kat's from New Hampshire. She tends to go to Salem, Massachusetts very often. She's within driving distance of Salem, and she is constantly bringing something home with her from Salem. And once again, you have to be prepared to deal with it. But yeah, I've had crew members, I mean, literally since I've been doing this, which was 2011 with Paranormal Challenge, that have quit because they get attachments, and either A, they think they're too tough to deal with it, or B, they won't listen to my advice on how to deal with it. And then they can't handle it to the point where they end up quitting. And I'm not saying it's safe. It's definitely dangerous. I've had some even personal experiences myself that have been really difficult to get through. But you have to play it safe too, going into these locations. But at the same time, I can give warnings, but I can't be responsible for everyone if they don't want to take my advice.
For those people who are struggling with attachments on them, what are the steps you take to remove them from you each time you get one from visiting a location or come into contact with an entity?
So sage is the first step.
Okay.
My grandmother was Native American, so I grew up with sage and like Palo Santo being just a immense part of daily life. And that was something the Native Americans used. So you can get dry sage. You can even order it off of Amazon, literally. And you light the sage, and there's so many ways you can do it. If you Google it, you can go counterclockwise, clockwise. You do need to open at least one window or door in your house, basically for an exit for the energy. But the sage basically brings kind of like, I want to say, mutes or neutralizes the energy in the house. And oftentimes when you're looking at something like a dark attachment, they will prefer chaotic energy or chaos energy. And when they start that attachment with someone, usually that person starts getting all out of place. They get messy with clutter. They are late for work, and all this negative energy, like attracts like, right?
Yes.
So that's why this sage and Palo Santo, it neutralizes the energy. You can go further with things like salt rings around your house. Sometimes I've had to do that. There's further steps you can go as far as bring in a priest or something. But the biggest thing I tell people when you get an attachment is, why are you letting it live there for free? Why are you letting that energy live at your house without paying rent?
Very good point. And now let me ask too, because this may be another part that you may use, and this goes back to the other point that I wanted to mention when you were telling the story of that person who was vomiting blood. Holy water. You said you used holy water, and that's one thing that I've heard from everybody, no matter at what level of experience and how much ghost hunting they use, they always have an endless supply of holy water. Do you have a priest that goes with you or blesses water to become holy water?
Well, actually, Blake, my co-owner, is ordained for that reason. But we don't. I've never been in a situation other than that. I'm not the kind of, I'm like, break out the holy water, everybody. Like, break out the sage. You also don't want to sage a location without the owner's approval, right? Because if it's like a haunted hotel, you don't want to like remove the energies and then they have no, traffic as far as, making their business out of a haunted location. But holy water is a little extreme for me. I feel like I do travel with some, but it's not something I just fling around, you know what I mean? Like, just because. But in that case, when you're talking about like stigmata things happening, I think it's absolutely necessary. And that was the only case I've really had to use it in. And to be perfectly honest, at the time that happened, I had no idea what I was doing with the holy water. I just knew it needed to be on him, you know what I mean? Which it did help, thank God. So
Instincts. There's your
yeah,
instincts of your years of training and
right.
even before your life,
Yeah.
carried over. For those people who don't know what stigmata is, clearly I know you know, and that's why I'm going to ask if you could explain it for those people who may not know it.
Sure. It can be in a sense of religious as far as Christ and the way Christ was hung on the cross. I think paranormal investigators don't necessarily identify stigmata totally with the holy side. It could just be like demonic activity, basically causing bleeding from the areas where Christ was hung, right? So it can be wrists, it can be eyes, it can be mouth. And then that's what stigmata is. And that was what scared, the throwing that blood obviously made me nervous when that camera tech that happened. But when the blood started just to drip through out of the corner of the eyes, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not even equipped for this. I mean, clearly you don't go, especially in the beginning phases of paranormal, like you're not like thinking, oh, I'm going to go into this location and finally I get to experience stigmata. Like, those aren't exciting moments. You know what I mean? Like, I had crew on set that night when that happened with him, and they come up to me as he's what we believe we're witnessing a possession, and they say, should we be filming this? And my response was no. Like the health and well-being of my crew comes before anything else. Like, of course, that'd be a wonderful thing to get on film, but like, it's not exciting. If you're like witnessing a real possession or stigmata, you're not sitting there like, oh, yay, this is so exciting. It's like, oh my God, like, we need to make sure this person doesn't die from
Yeah,
this.
it's not an Instagram moment, that's for sure. You want to take
No.
care of that person.
Absolutely.
Now, let me talk to you about demonic possessions. It wasn't until not too long ago that I wasn't even aware of Annabelle. Tony Spera described to me the different stories involving Annabelle and how he has to handle Annabelle, and even when he brought Annabelle to Zach. And something happened there, but he couldn't really go into detail. Maybe Zach told you. But then I started looking further into that, and then I found Robert the Doll from 19 either '06 or '08. Only recently have I come about and found out there are so many more other possessed dolls and other possessed items. What have you seen, especially in Vegas, being to Zach's museum?
Yep, I have been to Zach's museum. It's interesting you bring that up because in January, my producer Kat got to go meet Annabelle with Tony Spera on the East Coast, and she had just been obsessing with the photos that she took with Annabelle to the point where she had to delete them off of her phone. She thought she was becoming oppressed by it, so she's actually removed the photos from her phone. As far as those go, I do believe in the demonic dolls. They scare me. I'm not going to lie about that. I have been to Zach's museum a bunch. I even got to go. He invited me in a few times before it was officially open. And one of the times I went in before it was open to the public, he had invited me into the room next to the doll room, which is kind of like his oddities room. And he was sitting in a chair, and he had an empty chair across from him. And he's like, why don't you come in and have a seat? And I don't know what it was. Like, of course, you're in a haunted museum, which is already like weird and uncomfortable, right? There's so much energy just going on in general. But there was something about the chair I didn't like. So I kind of paced the chair a little bit back and forth. Mm-hmm. And I kept looking at him, and I was like, I don't know. And he's like, just have a seat. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I just kept saying that. And finally, he's like, so you don't want to sit down and chat? And so finally, I was like, okay. He goes, I know why you're feeling weird. And I was like, why is that? And he goes, that's the exact chair that I had Annabelle sitting in.
Oh, really?
And I said, Annabelle who? Annabelle who? And yeah, so it was that chair. It was that exact chair.
So even Annabelle, no matter where Annabelle goes, she sort of leaves something in that chair. I'm wondering, next time I'm going to talk to Tony, I'm going to ask him if anything happened with that seat, because he required that if Zach brought Tony with Annabelle over, he said, I want another first class seat for Annabelle. She is not going into the cargo. She is sitting in a seat. I'm very curious if anyone's ever followed up with that airline, that specific plane, that specific seat, to see if anything has ever happened to that person.
I would not have wanted to be on that plane, that's for certain. That's absolutely for sure. I do know what happened with the doll and Annabelle. There was a strict code of conduct that Tony Spera had required Zach and the crew not to touch Annabelle. And during the investigation at the museum, Zach had reached over and he did, in fact, grab Annabelle's leg, which inevitably shut down the entire investigation. So what was kind of circulating on social media when that happened was a lot of people were giving Zach flack for it. Clearly, he's my friend in real life. And, at first, I was a little turned off by that idea. I thought, why in the world would you want to touch the most haunted doll in the world? Why would you want to touch it? And until Kat went to meet Annabelle in person, did my mindset sort of change. So Tony was extremely upset with the fact that Zach had touched Annabelle. The entire crew was kind of frowned upon for it. But after Kat went in person to Annabelle, she even said there's something so compelling about that doll's energy that it makes you want to move closer and closer to it. So in my opinion, the paranormal community shouldn't have given Zach so much flack for touching the doll, because I think it was an energy issue. I don't think it was just him saying, I want to touch Annabelle. I think she is probably demonic, as everyone says, and demons are often tricky and compelling. And I believe that is what happened. That is truly what I believe happened.
And Tony, in also Zach's defense, Tony did say that Zach seemed entranced, looking at Annabelle as if Annabelle had him in a hypnotic trance. And I totally believe that to be true.
I do too, because Kat was in trance as well. In trance in person, and also in trance just with her phone. She said she could not put her phone down. She just wanted to stare at it. She also told me the night that she had gone to this chat with Tony Spera on the East Coast, there were some people in the audience sitting near Kat. It was a couple, so a man and a woman, that were making fun of the doll, saying you're not demonic. And they had gotten an email sent out to everyone that attended that couple was involved in a car accident that night.
Yes, Yes, the college boy with his girlfriend who basically told Annabelle, look, if you can cause slashes on someone, I demand that you prove yourself and harm me right now. Nothing happened, and according to Tony, him and his girlfriend were riding home on a motorcycle, and out of the blue, that guy, the college boy, seemed to have lost control, and it almost was like he was riding his bicycle. He was not drunk, he wasn't weaving or anything, but just at one split second he just veered and hit, I believe, a tree, instantly killing him. So the inference is, yeah, that maybe Annabelle did affect his mind at that point. But who says that they have to? Uh, if you demand Annabelle to do anything, who says she has to do what you want then and there? She could always do what you ask later, or not do what you ask, or do something even worse than that.
Right. No, I totally agree. I think the one that died was actually a different story than the one that Kat experienced. They were just in a regular car wreck. But it
Oh.
still goes to tell you, don't taunt what you don't know. I mean, don't taunt it. I went to Zach's museum a couple of years ago. I had a fan event and I took a group of fans to Zach's museum to meet me. And Zach knew I was coming and he said, I'm going to let you have access to the basement of the museum. And that's a very rare occasion. He doesn't just let anyone go down there, because in past events, there was actual satanic rituals that took place, possibly even sacrifices in the basement of this museum. So we went down there, and there were a couple people in the group that weren't sure about it. They were kind of like nervous to be down there, they were making jokes. They were basically making jokes, and I would have to stop and say, let's not make jokes. I understand this is something you're unfamiliar with. Often as humans, if there's a topic we're unfamiliar with, the easiest way out of that discussion or rhetoric is making a joke out of it. But I had asked them graciously, please, we're all down here, which means we could all be affected by it. It was very haunted. We later ended up looking at some of the footage that he let me shoot in there. And what had happened was it had appeared. I have a full face of makeup, right? Like, I'm a full cosmetologist. Before I practiced paranormal, I was all into beauty and makeup and hair. So my face was fully done with makeup. And we looked at this footage once we got out, and it looks like I have blood dripping all over my face from these people basically like taunting and making jokes from standing in Zach's museum. So I was kind of the weakest link that they chose to pick on. And often that happens when you're around something super, super dark. So I would definitely suggest not taunting or joking. Even if you don't believe in it, it's just best to keep your mouth shut, because it may not even be you that ends up getting injured. It might be your girlfriend or your boyfriend or someone that's with you, in your circle.
Yeah, and it might even be someone that's in your circle, but that you're not seeing on a regular basis. Like, for instance, for me, it could be family in Greece that could be affected by something that I would stupidly do. And I use the word stupidly with caution, because if you taunt a demon, what do you expect? And I'm not trying to say anything bad about anyone, but the message should be clear. Please, for your own sake and for those you love, do not taunt demons, especially demons. And I'm going to ask you this, Krystal. Have you come across any ghosts that are impersonating somebody, a human, a kind, loving, caring human, maybe even a friend or a loved one that had passed away, and then you find out that they're just impersonating them, and what's behind the veil is, say, a demon?
A couple of times that's happened, not personal, like personal family members, but I will say that when I've been in locations, when you hear a little girl like talking, laughing, or a little girl EVP, my mind instantly goes to the demonic side, because they want you to trust them. And I know it sounds so bad to keep your sort of your veil up and making sure you're protected. Most times people automatically want to be like, oh, it's a little girl, we have to help her or talk to her or something. Yeah, but you better make sure that's a little girl first before you're fully into like opening up to that spirit, because you don't know. And that's happened. Like, we've opened up to energies as far as communication, and by the time the end of the investigation rolls around, we realize it's not a little girl, but we have let our trust in. So please be careful of that. Also, I have done Ouija board sessions where the demon Zozo comes through.
Zozo. Ooh.
And it's actually quite the opposite, though. My rhetoric and kind of thoughts behind paranormal are, when you feel demonic activity, you will know it. And that's part of the reason I hate so many shows out there. It's like all demons and demonic. No, it's not. And if I'm doing a Ouija board session and Zozo comes through and I sense the energy, I call it out. I'm like, you're not Zozo. This is not demonic. This is something else. And then often it'll be like, yeah, you're right, or yes, or it'll go somewhere else. So it can go both ways. Sometimes you can even get just regular ghosts or spirits impersonating what they want, which is fear. And inevitably, in my opinion, they want the fear because we as humans, when we're afraid, we emit electromagnetic fields, EMFs, which are what these energies use to manifest or communicate with. So of course they're going to try to scare us and make us in fear, because they need that energy to communicate.
Very well said. Now let me ask you this about hauntings in the United States in general before we go to the world. What are some of the most haunted places, locations that you have visited?
Asylums are crazy.
Ooh.
But once again, the compassion side, which is what we're building with Girl Diaries, is that there's not many females or women in paranormal, which I can't stand, because I feel like women in paranormal would bring a more empathetic side to it. When you hear asylum, you just think of like crazy people, but you also need to remember some of those people were not even crazy. They were in there because their families just abandoned them in the early 1900s. They were literally thrown in and they locked away the key. They were left there to die. Oftentimes, even the mental patients were abused, molested. So we go in with more of a compassionate side, because it's just tragic that people get left and they get stuck in what I call the gray zone. So I would absolutely say asylums are huge. But my favorite kind of haunts are the small town haunts that have kind of fallen off the map and nobody hears about. And that's because there's so much rich history, and most of the time they're really untouched as far as investigations go. So those are my favorites as far as like just little towns all over the United States.
Do you know of any towns that exist in Southern California that were rich in history but may have dwindled because of either some activity or maybe because a freeway was built somewhere nearby that nobody needed to cross through the town anymore, or any of the plethora of reasons why?
There are, Los Angeles is so huge, but there's a lot of places in LA that had old asylums, and some of them are still standing. They're just completely abandoned. You can't access them because they're owned by the state, so they stay completely empty. But we believe they're very haunted. So sometimes you can gain access, most of the time not. You have to do a lot of negotiating. I don't know why they keep them standing and not tear them down. I assume they do still see them as like a piece of history. There was one we were just trying to get into recently that was an all women's sort of like asylum turned to mental health institute. But you're right, when big cities come in, big highways come in, San Bernardino, you have all these mass amounts of people. Those places close up. Obviously, they had traumatic things happening in there, unethical things, and then they're just kind of left and just disappear from existence.
Now, I'm assuming, as a lot of people have been through what's very close to me, the Queen Mary.
Yep.
Have you had any experiences there?
I have. Yep, I've been there. The one thing I was shocked about the Queen Mary is, first of all, that's the only ship I've ever been on, and it stayed in harbor. Thank you very much, because of my fear of drowning.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful. I didn't realize how thin the walls were. like if you're trying to investigate because it's on a ship. But we were in a suite and we had a lot of things happening in there. It seems to me like it's a lot of residual things in the section that we were in, as far as just people coming in to stay and sort of enjoy their stay. We did at night go down below deck. I want to say level 2 or 3 is usually it's usually cut off to the public, but at night it's still open. So you can go down there, which is supposed to be like the most haunted deck. And it's really eerily strange. Like the only way I can explain it is it kind of sounds like negative decibels when you're hearing, which to me, I assume that means there's a lot of energy going on down there. It's super haunted. It's very historical though. Almost, I mean, I know it's not the Titanic, but it almost gives you that feeling of like being in that time.
Well, wasn't it built by White Star Line, the same people
It
who built?
was.
Yeah, so I
Mhm.
obviously has the similarities. And the pool room is the room that I hear the most stories emanate from. I don't know which level. I'm assuming it has to be 3, maybe. The lowest level possible. That's just from my perception. I've never been. I've never had the chance to stay the night because when you stay the night, as opposed to going there for dinner, you have more access. Even though you are not going to get all the access, you're still going to get more access than those who just show up for the day or the evening. So anyhow,
I
now
got lucky somehow. When I went in, one of the girls working at the desk had recognized me from YouTube.
ah,
And she had given me all these little like advice on what to do. But I have been in the pool area, which is that same deck that I'm talking about, but for some reason that area made me feel very, very sick. um
really?
yeah, I had to actually physically leave because I just felt like I was gonna just vomit. And so I once again, I think there's just so much energy going on down there, and that maybe they're concerned for guests, which is actually, I read somewhere on an article, I'm not sure where, don't quote me on it, that they were about to open up that deck, so maybe they're working on it.
I would hope so because I know a lot of people who are trying to become ghost hunters definitely want access. It shouldn't be limited to just a select few, and even more so, the people who are the corporation that runs it shouldn't be the only people that decide where you should be able to visit of this historic ship, which, like you said, is at its harbor for a reason because it's now a museum. So
Right.
I really hope people at some point do allow. There is a question here I wanted to ask. Lasha Senyak asks, what does she think shadow people are? Are they ghosts?
There's theories behind shadow people. You know, in my case, when I see shadow people, I'm not sure if it's dark like some people want to make it out to be, or if it's just the way I can visually see spirits, because once again, I put that filter back on. But like if you go to Jerome, for example, in the like really old building they have, it's the original hospital that dates back to like the 1700s. That's the building where they've had people break in and do like satanic worship. That building, you will see crawlers, which are shadow people. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what crawlers are.
Yes, yes.
So crawlers are like these, they look like they're a human body, but on their hands and knees crawling literally like on the ceilings and walls. Oftentimes you'll see that in Jerome on like the ceiling of the morgue, which I do correlate with possible dark slash demonic activity. So that could be one version of a shadow person. Another version of a shadow person would be having, what is it called when you're laying down in bed and you're sleep paralysis. Oftentimes, people that have sleep paralysis will have a dark shadow they wake up to standing over them. What is it? I'm not sure. Once again, so oftentimes shadow people can be related to dark activity, but once again, I think it depends on how your brain, how you've allowed yourself to open up and process what you're seeing.
Now, let me say one interesting thing about shadow people that really, it was only from one guest, and this was Grant Wilson, and he changed my outlook forever. He said, I said, what was the most interesting thing you've ever asked a ghost? Did you ever ask them what we appear to them as? He said, yes, we appear as shadows to them, which is why if you're trying to do a ghost hunt, you do not group a bunch of people in the middle of the room, because to ghosts, you're going to appear as a big blob of shadow. Whereas opposed to if you're spread around, well, then they feel less threatened. So I'm wondering if the reason we're seeing these shadow people are because that's the way they see us.
It could be. I think the veil is thinning. I mean, we're in an era or generation where it's not the 1960s, where if you spoke out about, being into paranormal, communicating with the dead, you were sort of shunned for it. We're in an era of 2019 where it's all over our culture. It's reality TV, it's documentaries, it's everywhere, and it's just socially accepted. So I think because of that, people in all generations now are more open-minded to not only communicating but actually having an experience. And in my opinion, the veil is thinning.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because 50, 60, even 70 years ago, post World War II, if you were talking about these, there's a good chance you could be thrown into an asylum or ostracized. But 100 years ago, 120 years ago, Sir Arthur Clarke, the author of Sherlock Holmes, he was huge into seances. Seances were a thing for the aristocrats to do all the time. I'm sure you heard of Patience Worth, right?
Absolutely. Even H.P. Lovecraft is huge with the necromancy.
So that's one thing that shows to me that it's a pendulum that seems to me it was swung one way 100 plus years ago, then swung to the conservative side. If you can't see it, feel it, touch it, and explain it, then it's not real and you're crazy. Back to where it was about 120 years ago, except now we have technology, we have experience, plus we get to take all these past lessons, like H.P. Lovecraft, like the lady who was communicating with Patience Worth, all these different things that are now included into our current investigations.
Absolutely, 100%. I totally agree. And just the fact that once you gather all that information, you can do something with it, like produce a documentary or a reality series. And there's a huge, community of people that want to see it. So it's socially accepted.
It very much is now. It definitely is now. Now, you mentioned that it was the Queen Mary that got you sick, right?
Yes.
Has there ever been any other instances where you yourself got sick, not just someone around you like the other gentleman who was vomiting blood?
I've never had like an extreme thing happen where I've like thrown up blood or had anything weird like that happen. But I have had like the feeling of illness happen before. It's interesting because oftentimes that I will feel something as it's happening, we will also catch something on camera. Like, for example, when I was talking about the Bros Hotel, which was where we believed we had captured some Latin EVPs along with the Roswell rods. I was speaking on camera, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I said, I'm going to be sick. Like, I just know it's going to happen. And as I said that, a shadow actually stepped out from me, became its own unit, and then walked off screen. So I also think that maybe those feelings of sickness can be triggered by extremely high electromagnetic fields, which once again, we need those EMFs in order to communicate with the other side.
Now, as far as EVPs, you mentioned the one that you captured that you can't play because of the language. What are some that you've captured that is not harmful and maybe giving you a message that could help you or even help the entity that's trying to communicate with you?
I've actually had, the River's Inn, which is a location in Antonito, Colorado. It's also a very small town. There is a family that passed away, one at a time in there. And at the time, I think it was the early 1900s, they were the richest family in the area, which to this day, there's only like 800 people that live there. So the population is still very low. But when we went in to investigate, we were kind of asking questions like, do you want to stay? And the answer often was, well, yeah, we don't, so you don't want to cross over? No. But it got very comfortable after a while. They ended up starting to make jokes with me. Like, they really liked my energy. So one of the, we actually got communication through the Ovulus. And I had said, what's your name, or what's your daughter's name? And they had said, Genio. And then of course, my brain went Genio, like the turkey, like the brand. And all of a sudden, the Ovulus comes through and it goes, har, 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 like it thought it was funny.
Interesting. So it has like you said, a sense of humor.
It does. But if you look at, like, the Ovulus has an actual dictionary, there are no names on it, and it doesn't have anything that says har, har, har. So that energy was able to actually manipulate the EMFs within the Ovulus and give me a whole new word that didn't even exist in the dictionary itself. So for some reason, my energy tends to be more upbeat, positive when I am interacting. Now, I have had some dark attachments happen. Like, oftentimes when I go to Zach's museum, I get followed home by the spirit of Ed Gein. Are you familiar with who he is?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So it's the Texas Chainsaw, basically, massacre guy. It was based off of him in the story. So Ed Gein was from a little tiny town in Wisconsin, and he was murdering and grave robbing women, specifically skinning them and trying to build a female bodysuit to impersonate, of all things, his mother. So he has a really big mommy issue and women issues. And I think that he knows me from going into Zach's museum before it was even open. So ever since then, he just mutes with my energy and follows me home. He may not be a demon, but to me, that is extremely dark. Someone that could do those things. And so we know when we get followed home, and you just have to take care of it is the biggest thing.
Now, let me ask you this. People, when they pass away, and some people who come back have a near-death experience where they describe if it's a positive experience, it could be a light and other things like that, sometimes a tunnel, out-of-body experiences, and if they stay dead, which obviously we don't know at this point, if they're in that realm of so-called heaven or hell, whatever it may be, what they're experiencing. But then you have the others that pass away that are still staying in these realms. Why have you, or through your investigations, what have you figured out is the reason why some ghosts are ghosts as opposed to others who pass away and move on to another plane that we can't access?
I think it depends on the location. Like, for example, if you're going in a location where there's been, like, the actual murderer is still living there, and I think he's deathly afraid to cross over or go on to the next realm and kind of face judgment for what he did on this earth. So he'd rather stay stuck, what I call, in the gray zone. But I think for other people, like going to these inns that I've been to and the questions I ask of, like, why do you stay? Oftentimes it's just as simple as, this is my house and where else would I go? And they don't want to pass on because they don't think they need to. Maybe they were agnostic when they were here on Earth. Maybe they were atheists. Maybe they just don't care to know what's the next realm. Kat and I did get some really good evidence when we were investigating at one location, and they just straight up didn't even know they were dead. They didn't even know they were dead. And we got clear as day EVPs and communication. So I just think it depends on the location and what sort of energies you're actually interacting with.
Have you ever had the daunting task of letting a dead ghost know, who doesn't know they're dead, that they are in fact dead?
We have said that before. We've said, do you understand you're not physically here, on this realm? And the next question is usually like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And we say is, your physical body is no longer here. Like, you're not alive, and your family is probably waiting on the other side for you. And it's usually this shock, like, oh, really? I didn't know. Are you sure? Like, they don't understand. We do not, quote, cross ghosts over. I don't think anyone can guarantee that. I can't stand psychics that claim they can do that. You can't guarantee it. I don't think you should promise a dead person you can cross them over with no guarantee. I am absolutely open to you saying you could try or want to help, but you don't know how to guarantee. It's also all about that free will thing, which means we as humans, even in spirit form, have the opportunity or options when to ask for help and when not to. And even if you make that offer, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to take it.
Well said. And you know what? Speaking of free will, if you are promising a ghost that you're going to cross them over to be with their other family, and they are somebody who in life was someone who was easily ticked off or gotten mad very easily, and yet you were not able to succeed, well, I don't even want to stick around for what would happen if you angered that ghost.
Absolutely. Well, that, and you just can't, I knew this paranormal team back in the day before I got on YouTube that they would promise this little girl spirit that they would cross her over, but they'd never go back and fulfill that promise. And I just think it's wrong. I just don't think it's ethical, in my opinion.
You're absolutely right. And, again, goes with one with free will, and two, promises that you can't keep. The resentment that follows with that, you can't even put an amount to it or how much damage can come about from broken promises, because it depends on the person and the situation and the type of promise. But a serious promise like that, like, hey, I'm gonna reunite you with your family, and then you fail, like I said, I don't want to stick around for that. Now
It's true.
let
Being
me
an empath too, empathing the energy of that entity of like, how could you live with yourself even saying that you were going to help this person and then you couldn't fulfill that? Just being an empath in general, I think you need to do just ethically what's right and wrong.
empath. Can you, for those people who don't know what an empath is, can you describe what an empath is?
Sure, an empath is someone who easily mutes to other people, or in this case, dead people's energy. Meaning, I could be sitting in the room with Kat and Chanel and feel what they're sensing right now within themselves. So, like, if you go into a location, which is what I always say, I don't read, you know, vocabulary or English as far as speech. I read energy. And it's when you go into a location, you can go in two different rooms and feel two completely different people or energies that are in there. You can do it with real life humans, or you can even just do it with animals. There's people that are animal readers. And yeah, I'm definitely a big empath.
I've always understood, or at least my personal belief, is that we humans should all be telepathic, or we were at one point, and something caused us to start speaking in tongues, literally, with our voices. And the reason being is that we should be able to communicate with an animal and feel that it's feeling, whether it be fear or hunger or love or anything, and that should go across every living person or being on this planet and other planets, if you want to count that too.
I agree. And it's not just this compassion, it comes out of compassion. Like, in fact, we were at location, a few months ago filming for the series, and there was a loose dog running down the street, and we're in the middle of nowhere in like a desert oasis. And of course, we're not going to let the dog, go. So here we are. We're supposed to be filming. The whole crew is all empaths out running, trying to chase and catch this dog, because we wanted to make sure it was safe. But yeah, I think it's so important. I feel like, just being a good human in general is someone with compassion. And I mean, being an empath isn't easy though. That's definitely the truth. I mean, I've had to train myself over the years when to turn it on and when to sort of bubble up to turn it off, because being an empath can be extremely, extremely emotional at times as well.
Easily, if you're experiencing the same pain that someone or something is feeling, and you're feeling it to that same degree, I couldn't imagine that unless you're really hardened, that your heart would just melt from sadness.
It is. And well, I always say too, being an empath can be dangerous because not only do you attract the light, but you also attract the moths. And I mean that as being possibly demonic activity, dark activity, or even just in general people who are energy vampires. You can attract those, like in human life. And that can be draining. And you just have to really be protective and careful of your energy, of your own energy, and making sure how you reset it and recharge it.
Let me ask you about channeling. Have you ever channeled other spirits?
I have not. I have seen people do it. I haven't done it. I have had a past life regression happen, though, if that counts.
Yeah, please let me know, because obviously, if you knew when you were 3 years old this ghastly death of this drowning, I would love to know what the regression told you.
Yeah, I had a really good friend that was psychic at the time in Denver, and for months he had been suggesting, I trusted him very much. He's like, we should do a past life regression. I think it could help you with your drowning. That's exactly why. And I think we should try it, and here's why. And I was like, I didn't know what to expect. Clearly, I had had good psychic readings and bad psychic readings. I had had people read my tarot cards and all that stuff, but I thought, I don't know, how does a regression even work? I didn't even research it because I was afraid I was going to set myself up for unrealistic expectations, or if something happened that I did want to happen or didn't, either way, I would be like disappointed. So I decided, you know what, I trust him. I'm just going to try it. And the regression happens so you have to lay down in sort of a very still meditative position. And whoever is leading you through this sort of meditative journey, you have to trust them. Obviously, you have to be prepared to open up to this person and just open up in general. And I didn't know what was going to happen. One thing I noticed, because I'm really fluent with meditation. I'm big in that. I think it's really important to reset your energy using meditation as, sort of an energy light worker slash an empath. And so I was sort of in this meditative state, and I did realize that my eyelashes and like my eyelids started to flutter at a really fast rate, which I assume is when like the trance sort of thing started to happen. But there's so much that happened. It ended up being about an hour to an hour and a half. He didn't really stop you when you're in the middle of that, obviously. And at the end of it, he makes you kind of come to and come out of it. But some interesting things happen, like I have developed a relationship with Saint Michael over the years, using him as a tool for investigating. And so there was a point where Saint Michael had kind of showed up. It was like wings and feathers sort of thing. I'm very close to my Native American heritage, which is Cherokee Indian. And I ended up having sort of like a hawk totem show up, which I wasn't expecting. And I had somehow been placed on what looked like to be a beach surrounded by flying hawks, and like this Indian man sort of walking towards me as if it was like very protective sort of thing. So yeah, having a past life regression, you have to make sure you're spiritually prepared for it, if that makes sense.
I'm glad you brought up St. Michael, because Kat in the chat is talking about St. Michael and how she had a family member dream of him. So it's perfect timing. Now, let me ask you about ley lines. Do they play a factor on certain locations that may have more activity, paranormal activity?
I do think so. I do. I actually purchased books on ley lines, specifically too with the Bermuda Triangle. I was really into that for a while. It scares me, but I truly believe there's almost like portals too that exist near the ley lines. Also, regarding UFO contact, I think there's often, I have studied a lot of the UFO stuff that happens on the East Coast. And sometimes where massive abductions take place is where lots of crossing ley lines lay in the earth.
You're absolutely right about that. And before I really started getting involved in ghosts, UFOs was my main thing. But then I started to realize that the umbrella of paranormal covers ghosts, UFOs, cryptozoology, and everything else, because I think they're all interrelated. So these ley lines that are crossing in certain places that have more activity, like you mentioned, could be natural stargates, or like the Bermuda Triangle. Who's to say that every ship that goes disappears and the people on there just die? What if they end up through in another ocean, maybe on in a distant galaxy on another planet because of this portal.
I agree 100% with that, which scares me indefinitely, but I absolutely agree. They can't find the ships, they can't find the people, there's not even bodies. Where do they go? They literally transfer somewhere else.
Now, let me ask you about spectral animals. Have you come across those?
Now, are spectral animals considered the ones that represent, like, if you see a coyote on this road 3 times, you die type of things?
No, no, more of like a ghost of, say, a dog that may have passed away that you see and then just
Okay.
disappears, or even may have, red eyes or something like that. That's what I mean.
Yep, I have seen energies of animal spirits, absolutely, which kills me because I feel like animals and legitimate children's spirits, not demonic activity. I feel like they are probably the most trapped in the gray zone because they wouldn't know how to ask for help or how to get out of that situation. So yeah, I get emotional with spirit. I'm more empathetic with my empath towards animals and spirit animals than I am sometimes with humans. And that's just because I'm a huge animal advocate, huge animal lover. Now, the red thing that happened, there's a road in Colorado. I know all the Colorado lore because literally I grew up there, like living at all the haunted locations. There was a really old road that literally stemmed back to like the 1700s in Colorado, back to where there were even like witch hangings there and all kinds of stuff. On this road, it's called Riverdale Road, and if anyone's curious about it, I did do a video on it on our YouTube channel, so youtube.com/Ghost Girl Diaries, all one word. Riverdale Road was really, really haunted, and it was known for having hellhounds at a few locations, where there had been like different houses that had been burned to the ground and things like that. If you go up there in current day, there's like mass construction that is taking place and there's houses all over the place. But back in the day, in high school, when I'd go there to investigate, it was completely empty lots of land for miles and miles down this one road. And I did experience what they claim to be as hellhounds there, which are giant dogs with red eyes. The energy that those give off does make you just feel like you're in complete fear. In complete fear.
I would imagine so. And the other question is it's some of these hellhounds, are they spirits of dead humans? Who's to say, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, you can't really determine it. I do think there's some sort of guardians, though, for not wanting you to access something else.
now, let me ask you this because I've noticed, like you said, as the pendulum is swinging, as the veil is thinning, as we are entering, or we are in this new age, there are a lot more people and paranormal groups that are sprouting up. People who want to investigate the unknown. What advice would you give for those up and comers ghost hunters,
What
particularly those?
advice would I give for up and coming ghost hunters? Um, well, one topic Kat has recently brought up, which I think is perfect opportunity to talk about, especially as you're learning trial and error processes, because that's really the only way you're going to learn. You cannot be responsible for anyone other than yourself when you're investigating, especially when you're the newbie. And let's say you're going in with your whole group of friends, and let's say your one friend decides to go in and provoke the demon, like you said earlier. It is not the rest of the group's responsibility to go in there and make sure everyone's okay. Yes, you should have each other's backs, but I feel like it should already be common knowledge and common sense not to provoke the demon, or in general, probably to provoke the unknown. I have been known for provoking, but I only provoke when I know that there were spirits that had been seriously traumatized or tortured in real life when they were there. Meaning, like if there was a doctor that was there traumatizing real life humans and using them as experiments, then I'm gonna taunt, right, to bring the doctor out. But you also need to go in when you're newbie to make sure that you have a respective sense of where you're at. Meaning you don't know what you're going to communicate with. Every investigation that we have, you cannot guarantee it's going to be good or guarantee it's going to be bad. You don't know what's going to come through. So just making sure that you're knowledgeable, and the biggest advice I can give people is learning how to get rid of attachments, because it's going to happen. I was that person in the beginning that told myself, I'm not going to get an attachment. It's not going to happen to me. And then it's all fun and games until it happens to you.
Well said. And you know what? Like, I know there are some people that are listening right now that are, in fact, have started their own paranormal groups. And I know they're going to take this advice and heed it closely. Now, let me ask you about exorcisms. Have you ever witnessed any?
I don't know if the one counts where my camera tech's eyes were bleeding, but I mean,
Ooh.
that wasn't a formal exorcism, obviously. I haven't witnessed them. I was on the phone with people that were in a different state. So I had basically been consulted as like the pro investigator to help with the paranormal side while they were conducting like the demonic dark side, if that makes sense. So I've been on the phone and witnessed it before. And as an empath, once again, you can't help but like feel the pain that these people go through when it's happening. Do I believe it's possible? Absolutely. I absolutely do. It's just really sad stories out there. You hear of, exorcisms that happen and then people actually lose their life. So
Ooh.
yeah, I do believe that they are possible, and I have witnessed one via audio.
And you mentioned the one about your camera technician whose eyes were bleeding?
Yeah, this is the guy that had the stigmata. He had his eyes bleeding out of the side. It was like little teardrops coming out of blood. And that's when I was undereducated and not really 100%. I still don't think I'm a pro. You should never call yourself a pro, because if you do that, then you think you've learned everything. And there's always room to grow. There's always knowledge to grow. But definitely at that time, I was still a youngin' and had no idea what I was doing. But we did have holy water. That was that same one. We had holy water and we used it on him, and we used a lot of St. Michael prayers. We'd pack some St. Michael candles. I always say, and I'm not a very religious person, but I always say St. Michael is my homeboy, is how I word it. And
Nice.
developing that relationship with him is important, I think.
Now, since we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to give you time to plug in everything like your YouTube channel and what's up and coming for you, if you have can pick this, go down to the craziest single story. I know there's a bunch that you've experienced and have heard, but if you could choose one, what would you say?
Oh man, one of the craziest stories. It would probably be experiencing the elementals in the Stanley Hotel, which in the presidential suite it was the leprechaun, and in the concert hall it was the troll. Because I feel like as an investigator, oftentimes, yeah, we hear demonic stories and we hear the regular, just run of the mill ghost that's haunting. But this was something out of my realm that I still feel like I'm not familiar with. We had been in the Stanley Hotel in the presidential suite, and we ended up seeing a little short man that was probably a foot to a foot and a half tall running through slamming doors in the presidential suite. And
Wow.
he had the little top hat and everything, and he was little evil laugh. It was literally what you would have thought of for a leprechaun. And I remember like all the friends in there were like, we haven't been drinking. No one's under the influence. Are we actually seeing this, And then the other one was experiencing the troll manifest in the concert hall of the Stanley Hotel. It was like a 4-foot troll, but what you would think of like the treasure trolls, where they have like the wide face and the wide body. And it manifested in front of us, literally. So it started out as nothing and then manifested into the troll image with the spiky hair. It did not speak, it didn't move, it didn't talk to us, didn't do anything except stand there. But everyone in the room that was witnessing it literally flung themselves like to the back wall as fast as they could, because it was like you couldn't get enough, like you didn't want any space or air in between you and the wall in case it could get behind you, type of thing. It didn't harm us, but I don't know, when you start seeing stuff like that that you think only exists in fairy tales, suddenly then there's even more investigating to do, and you realize there's even more out there that we haven't experienced yet as a community.
The tip of the iceberg, literally. And you know what? If I had seen a troll that just manifested in front of me and just stood there, didn't say anything, I think I'd probably be more scared than if that troll was there to deliver some sort of message. The silence itself was the message, is the way I'm interpreting it.
It was, yeah. No one spoke, not even the crew member. Nobody said a word. It was just dead silent in there.
And you also said something amazing, Crystal, that most everybody needs to pay attention to this and apply this to every aspect of their lives. Nobody can call themselves a pro at anything really because there's always room for learning, improvement, more experiences, especially when it comes to this. We are only seeing the tip of the iceberg, what they allow us to see. It's not like we could say, hey, tomorrow 6 p.m. Pacific time, we want three ghosts from different areas to sit down for an interview. Not going to happen. So we're sort of on their rules. And no matter how much expertise you may have, there's always more. And I think throughout this line of work that you're in, Crystal, they, other side, when I say they, meaning them, they will remind you just how little we really do know in the end. So, very powerful statement. Now, because we're running out of time, I want to give you time to plug in everything. But before you do, if you have one final statement for everybody, what would you say to them all?
My final statement is I always tell people, I'm doing something really extreme with my life. Like, I've made a living out of being a paranormal investigator. I obviously like to look at myself as a filmmaker, documentarian as well. But the biggest thing I can tell people is follow your dreams. Your soul on this planet, for the little time that we have here, because life is so short, your life will never be fully satisfied if you don't follow your dreams. Whatever, it can't be as extreme as what I'm doing, is what I tell people. And if I can make a living at doing what I'm doing, you can too, but you have to be willing to put in the elbow work. But it will work. You have to believe in yourself.
Well said. Now let's talk about where people can find you and see. You mentioned your YouTube channel, your upcoming series.
Yep, we have all social media. So literally, you could just Google Girl Diaries. We do have, like, the actual head company that we have is ghostgirlmedia.com, that has all of our social media links. But you can find us everywhere. We're on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. You can find Chanel Sherry there, who's our camera tech. You can find Blake Hawk there, who's my co-owner. You can find Kat Cormier there, who is my co-investigator, co-host, and producer. And then also you can always find me under Krystal Leandra on all social media.
Well said. And now let me give some shout outs. First of all, I want to thank Joe Montaldo, station owner of UPRN, and a big shout out to those people listening from 107.7 FM New Orleans, Louisiana, as well as iHeartRadio. Decades ago, you would not be carrying shows which you call fringe, but are now carrying, plus all the other networks, including Deprogrammed Radio Network and the station owner in the UKJC. I also want to thank, of course, my social media manager, Pam Vrettenberg. Please check out our website, unitedtruthseekers.com. Also, my associate producer, as well as VP of Operations, Josh Cherez. Much love, Josh. He's done a lot of work behind the scenes, and he is an up-and-coming ghost hunter. So hopefully, I guarantee you, Crystal, he is learning from your lessons and what you said today. And I do want to thank you, Krystal Leandra, everybody. It's been a fantastic time. Like I told you before, I knew as the moment I got on the phone with you for a quick pre-show chat that this time would fly by. Like you said, you are well versed and you are full of stories, and I would love to have you back, especially when it's time for your premiere.
Yay.
So keep me posted. And I want to thank, of course, the biggest and most important people are the listeners globally. No matter what forum you're listening to, even Twitch today, thanks to Krystal and her team, and YouTube Nation. For those of you who are writing in chat, I want to thank you all very much. Now remember, the only thing you have to remember about the show is the name of it, Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. Everything from the domain, Facebook, Instagram, Flickr, Twitter, Mine's Patreon, whatever you could think of. Some is posted on right now on YouTube, but you can see all the rest on the website. Buffer's another one that I didn't even know. Twitch we're a part of, even though it's not really active, but that's the same username. So just remember that, folks. All you have to remember is the name of the show. Now, the only thing I have to tell you too is remember, disclosure is all in your hands, folks. Please, if you have any stories, if you have anything you could add to this, please don't stay silent. Come forward. You are not going to be considered crazy when you're talking amongst us. You're definitely in these times. We're not living in the 50s and 60s. We're going to throw you in the puzzle factory anymore. This is why I ask everybody to please be proactive. With that being said, join us same place, same time tomorrow with the godfather of ufology, the one and only Stanton Terry Friedman. With that being said, folks, this is Dr. J, and I am officially signing off.